Dear student, the today topic is offenses of criminal force and assault. Section 349 of IPC defined force. This section contemplates as defined in clause 1 of the section that both the person one using force and the other to whom force is directed must be present to make the offense complete. According to section 349, a person is said to use force to another if he causes motion, change of motion, or cessation of motion to that others, or if he causes to any substance such motion or change of motion or cessation of motion as bring that substance into contact with any part of that other's body or with anything which that other is wearing or carrying or with anything so situated that such contact affect that other's sense of feeling, provided that the person causing the motion or change of motion or cessation of motion causes that motion, change of motion, or cessation of motion is one of the three ways hereinafter described. First, by his own bodily power. Second, by disposing any substance in such a manner that the motion or change or cessation of motion takes place without any further act or his part or on the part of any other person. Thirdly, by inducing any animal to move, to change its motion or to cease to move. This is the bare language of section 349. Now, let's discuss the particular section. The section defines force, which is not an offense by itself. The term force has been defined as number one, causing of motion, change of motion, or cessation of motion to other person, or secondly, causing to any substance such motion or change of motion or cessation of motion. What is number वन, सेकंड का ए इसमें एस्पेक्ट है, as bringing that substance into contact with any part of that person body. And the B point of section 349 subclass 2, with anything which that other is wearing or carrying or with anything so situated that such contact affects the other's sense of feeling. The third part of this particular section, which is defined section 349 force, is the causing, changing, or cessation of motion may be in one of the following three ways. Number one, firstly, by his own bodily power. Secondly, by disposing any substance in such a manner that motion, change, or cessation of motion takes place without any further act or his part or on part of any other person. Thirdly, by inducing any animal to move, to change its motion or to cease to motion. This is the breaking of section 349. The section, as I have earlier said, the term force denotes exertion of energy or strength producing a movement or change. A motion or change of motion or cessation of motion caused to inanimate object such as property without affecting human body is not the use of force to another within the meaning of section 349 of Indian Penal Code. In case of Chandrika Sahu versus State of Bihar, it is the important case. You can read it from the book. This is the section 349. This is, I have earlier said, it is not an offense itself. Now come to the criminal force. It means when this force become criminal force. The bare language of this section is whoever intentionally use force to another person. Means the first thing is when force used intentionally to any other person, the bare language says without that person's consent in order to the committing of any offense or intending by the use of such force to cause or knowing it to be likely that by the use of such force he will cause injury, fear or annoyance to the person to whom the force is used is said to use criminal force to that others. This is the bare language of section 349. So, criminal force means number one, intentionally using force to any person. Number two, without that person's consent. Number three, first, in you may write number 3, subclass A or part A, in order to the committing of any offense, or point number B, intending by the use of such force to cause or knowing it to be likely that by the use of such force he will cause injury, fear or annoyance to the person is using criminal force. The term force denotes the strength or power of coercion or compulsion. The illustrations of section 350 make this point clear. All these illustrations, which is discussed in section 350, in these illustrations, the act done without consent in order to the committing of an offense or with the intention or knowledge that they will cause injury, fear or annoyance to the person, that is, the person against the person to whom it is used. Section 350 explains when force become criminal. According to the section 350, when force is used, number 1, without consent defined in section 90 of Indian Penal Code, and number 2, for the commission of an offense, or when it is intentionally or knowingly used to cause injury, fear, or annoyance to another, it becomes criminal force. The definition of force is wide enough to include every possible type of force. But under section 95, act causes slight harm is no offense. So students, section 350, the main points which is important, the force is used without consent for the commission an offense and intentionally or knowingly used to cause injury. When these three aspects are proved, then the force become criminal force. The main requirements of section 350 is that the force must be used by one person against the other. If the force is applied to some substance or matters, it will not come under section 350. For example, to apply force to a lock of a house and break it open in the absence of the house owner does not fall within the purview of section 350, but to strike a pot with a person carrying and which is in contact with that person's body constitute the offense of criminal force. Acts done in the consequence of self-defense do not constitute offense of criminal force. Now, let's discuss the illustrations. There are many illustrations attached to section 350 from A to H. Every illustration attached to this particular section is very important, and you must read all illustrations carefully and trying to fulfill the main ingredient which is discussed in section 350. I want to read the illustration 1. Z is sitting a moored boat on a river. A unfastens the mooring and thus intentionally causes the boat to drift down the stream. मतलब मैं आपको बताना चाह रहा था कि एक रस्सी जो है, इलस्ट्रेशन कह रहा है कि एक जो बोट है वो रिवर के किनारे, नदी के किनारे रस्सियों से बंधी हुई है. एक व्यक्ति जाता है, उस रस्सी को ढीली कर देता है और ढीली करने का तात्पर्य हुआ कि अब वो बोट नदी में बहने लगेगी, ड्रिफ्ट करने लगेगी स्ट्रीम में. नाउ हियर ए इंटेंशनली कॉजेज मोशन टू जेट. व्हाट इज द इम्पॉर्टेंट हियर इज intentionally causes motion to another person, to Z, and he does this by disposing substance in such a manner that the motion is produced without any action or any person's parts. A has therefore intentionally used force to Z, and if he has done so without Z consents, in order to the committing of any offense or intending or knowledge to be likely that this use of force will cause injury, fear or annoyance to Z, he has used criminal force Z. What is the important in this illustration? And try to understand the section 350. What is illustration says? A fasten the mooring. उसे ओपन कर देता है, रस्सी को खोल देता है ताकि वो नदी में वो नाव बहने लगे, वो धारा में बहने लगे. ए डन्स दिस बाय इंटेंशनली. वो इसे इंटेंशनली करता है. बाय विच मोड? बाय यूज ऑफ फोर्स. वो उसके लिए फोर्स का यूज करता है. एंड इफ ही हैज़ डन सो विदाउट जेट्स कंसेंट. और जो कुछ भी वो करता है वो जेट की कंसेंट के बिना करता है. मतलब ये हुआ कि अगर जेड नाव में बैठा है और वो दूसरे से कह रहा है कि तुम किनारे से जो वायर्स हैं उसे तुम अनफास्टन कर दो या उन्हें ओपन कर दो, फिर यहाँ पर क्रिमिनल फोर्स कॉन्स्टिट्यूट नहीं होगा. इसके लिए क्या ज़रूरी है? इफ़ ही हैज़ डन सो विदाउट जेट कंसेंट. इससे भी क्रिमिनल फोर्स नहीं बनेगा. वाक्य क्या होना चाहिए? इन ऑर्डर टू कमिटिंग ऑफ एनी ऑफेंस आर इंटेंडिंग और नॉलेज इट टू बी लाइकली दैट दिस यूज ऑफ फोर्स विल कॉजेज इंजरी. क्या क्या हो सकता है? क्या व्हाट इज द इंटेंशन या व्हाट इज द नॉलेज? टू यूज ऑफ फोर्स for which purpose? To cause injury, fear or annoyance to Z. If these parts are satisfied, then we can say that A has used criminal force to Z. As I have earlier said, criminal force means intentionally using force to any person. Number 2, without that person consents. Number 3, in order to the committing of any offense or intending by the use of such force to cause or knowing it to be likely that by the use of such force he will cause injury, fear or annoyance to the person is using criminal force. So students, you have tried to understand the criminal force. All these 3 points are satisfied in illustration 1. Now come to the illustration number 3. Z is riding a palanquin. A intending the rob. Z seized the pole and stopped the palanquin. Here A has caused cessation of motion to Z, and he has done this by his own bodily power. A has therefore used force to Z, and A has acted thus intentionally without Z's consent in order to the commission of an offense. A has used criminal force to Z. Illustrations make very clear. जो illustrations attach हैं वो इस पर्टिकुलर सेक्शन विच इज क्रिमिनल फोर्स को काफ़ी हद तक क्लियर करते हैं. कुछ पॉइंट्स इसमें आप ट्राई देख सकते हैं. ए हैज़ कॉज सेसेशन ऑफ मोशन. This words used in section 350 and 349 also. And this cessation of motion has done by his own bodily power. And this particular illustration C says A has therefore used force against Z. And this force is used. The word used here is A has acted thus intentionally, means the force is used here intentionally. And what is the another? This is also important. Without जेड्स कंसेंट, मतलब वो जो कुछ भी फोर्स का यूज इंटेंशनली कर रहा है उसे जेड्स की कंसेंट के बिना कर रहा है, विदाउट जेड्स कंसेंट. What the purpose of this particular use of force? In order to the commission of an offense. So we can say that A has used criminal force to Z. Now students, try to understand the words which is used here is intention, without consent, and for the in order to commission an offense. If these ingredients are satisfied, then we can said that this is use of criminal force. Now come to the illustration D. A intentionally pushes against Z in the street. The word starts from this illustration. Intentionally pushes. ये इंटेंशनली पुशेस का मतलब कभी कभी ये होता है कि हम लोग बहुत जो शार्प गलियां होती हैं, सकरी गलियां होती हैं या भीड़ भाड़ होती है, मेले होते हैं, उसमें कभी कभी हम चलते रहते हैं और हो सकता है कि एक दूसरे को कभी धक्का लग जाए. तो ये क्रिमिनल फोर्स को कॉन्स्टिट्यूट नहीं करेगा, इससे क्रिमिनल फोर्स कॉन्स्टिट्यूट नहीं होता. क्रिमिनल फोर्स कॉन्स्टिट्यूट होने के लिए क्या होगा? सेक्शन डी इलस्ट्रेशंस क्या सेट करता है? इंटेंशनली पुशेस. अगर आपने इंटेंशनली किसी को धक्का दिया, इंटेंशनली पुश कर दिया, तो वहाँ पे क्रिमिनल फोर्स कॉन्स्टिट्यूट होगा. नाउ कम टू द इलस्ट्रेशन. ए इंटेंशनली pushes against Z in the street. Here, A has by his own bodily power moved his own person so as to bring it into contact with Z. He has therefore intentionally used force to Z, and if he has done so without Z's consent, intending or knowing it to be likely that he may thereby injure, frighten, or annoy Z, he has used criminal force to Z. Student, if you read carefully the illustrations, the main point says intention, without consent, and to use of that force for the commission of an offense. In section D, you see that the illustration says this may cause injury for the purpose of pushing is cause injury, frighten, or annoy Z. If these ingredients are satisfied, then we can say that the person used criminal force. Now come to the section F. Illustration F. A intentionally pulls up a woman's well. The word used here is intentionally pull up. The important point is pull up is intentionally. Here A intentionally use force. Illustration says the A used force, but this use of force is intentionally, and if he does so without her consent, the point is this use of force is without the consent of the another. What is the intention? Intention or knowledge, what the illustration says, intending or knowing it to be likely that he may thereby injure, frighten, or annoy her. He has used criminal force to her. What is the important illustration of? Intention. Intention to use force without the consent of another. And what is the intention or knowledge? To injure, to frighten, or annoy to the others. Here we can say that this is the use of criminal force. Now come to the illustration H. A incites a dog to spring upon Z without Z's consent. Here, if A intends to cause injury, fear, or annoyance to Z, he used criminal force to Z. What is this particular section says? A incites a dog to spring upon Z. Means A used force. Now come to the another point. Without Z's consent. Now this particular force moved towards criminal force. Here this particular illustration says, if A intends to cause this force to injure, fear, or annoyance to Z, then we can say that he uses criminal force to Z. So students, I think you will understand the difference between force and criminal force. When force becomes criminal? When number 1, intentional use of force. Number 2, without that another person consent. Number 3, in order to committing of any offense. Number 4, intending by the use of such force to cause or knowing it to be likely that by use of such force he will cause injury, fear, or annoyance to the person. स्टूडेंट्स आप सेक्शन ए टू एच जितने भी इलस्ट्रेशंस हैं उन सबको स्लोली रीड करें, उसे आप पढ़िए और उनमें जिन पॉइंट्स पे हैमर्स हैं उन पॉइंट्स को आप उसमें देखिए। बेयर एक्ट्स में वो चीज़ें सेटिस्फाइड हैं, जो चीज़ें इम्पॉर्टेंट हैं। व्हाट इज़ द नंबर 1 इज इंटेंशन, नंबर 2 इंटेंशनली यूज ऑफ फोर्स, number 3 without that person consent, without for the purpose of this use of force is committing to any offense. Students, you must read the illustrations attached section A to H, point A to H of your B.A.Ll.B Act. The case, you must read the decisions of Supreme Court. It is the latest case in this point, Chandrika Sao case, and this is decision of Supreme Court is important. The another case you can read from your books, that is the Bhagirath case. In this case, as I earlier said, you must read these two cases. Thank you very much.